Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are talking about one of the most mind-blowing military upsets in all of history. Seriously, it's a story of how something that looked absolutely impossible suddenly became inevitable.
So let's set the scene. It's the early 7th century. And for as long as anyone can remember, the world has been run by two superpowers, the Roman Empire and the Persian Empire. That's it. They're the only game in town. But then, out of nowhere, literally out of the Arabian desert, a force emerges that nobody, and I mean nobody, saw coming. And it's about to turn the entire world upside down.
All right, so let's just look at the matchup here. Because on paper, this is a total mismatch. It's not even close. On one side, you've got these ancient empires. We're talking 1,000+ years of history, right? They've got advanced tech, heavy cavalry that were basically tanks for their time, huge cities, massive populations. And on the other side, a group that's been unified for like less than a year. They've got lighter cavalry, simpler weapons, and way, way fewer people. So how in the world could they possibly win? It makes no sense. Or does it?
Well, to really get this, we can't just look at the new guys on the block. We have to look at the giants themselves. See, from the outside, they looked invincible. But underneath the surface, they were standing on foundations that were just crumbling. This whole story isn't really about a simple military victory. It's about deep, long-term problems, pre-existing conditions that made them ripe for a fall.
Okay, so get this. For almost 700 years, these two empires had been locked in what you could call a forever war. It's like a 7-century-long heavyweight boxing match. Imagine a war that goes on for so long that your great-great-great-great-grandparents fought in it. It just drained everything, their money, their soldiers, their will to fight. And the very last war between them, this huge 26-year slugfest, ended right before this new force appeared. It was the final knockout blow. For both of them, they were left completely shattered, both militarily and economically. Yeah, they had basically fought each other to a complete standstill. They bled each other dry, leaving the door wide open. But you know what? That incredible military exhaustion, that was only part of the problem. There was something else, something you couldn't see, an invisible enemy that was eating them away from the inside out. And the culprit, you're not going to believe this, was rice. Yeah, rice. So here's what happened. Fishermen from Indonesia figured out a new trade route to Africa, and they brought rice farming with them. Now, that sounds great, right? But to grow rice, you need these big, flooded paddies. And what loves flooded fields? Mosquitoes. Malaria-carrying mosquitoes. Suddenly, this new disease just rips through the population, and life expectancy, it just collapses. It went from over 40 years old, which was pretty good for the time, down to as low as 25. An absolute demographic catastrophe.
And if you think that's bad, it gets worse. On top of malaria, the bubonic plague hits. This wasn't just any plague. This was the plague of Justinian, a total cataclysm. We're talking about up to 60% of the population wiped out in some places. Can you even imagine that? It's a scale of death that's just hard to wrap your head around. And the knock-on effects were huge. Fewer people means you have no one to tax, no one to recruit for your army. Your whole economy just grinds to a halt. The two mighty empires, they were really just hollow shells of what they used to be. So you have these two exhausted, hollowed-out empires. It's created this massive power vacuum in the middle of the world. And right into that vacuum steps something completely new. A unified, super-motivated force, led by an absolute military genius. A man who is practically born for this exact moment in history. And you have to understand just how revolutionary this was. For the first time ever in recorded history, the tribes of Arabia were united. They were all under one banner, one leadership. Nobody had ever done that before. Not the Romans, not the Persians, not anyone. And overnight, this created a single, cohesive, fired-up force out of a region that the big empires had basically ignored for centuries.
And the guy leading the military charge? A man named Khalid ibn al-Walid. Look, historians talk about the great undefeated commanders. Alexander the Great, Genghis Khan. Khalid is right up there with them. He was a tactical mastermind who just did things that should have been impossible, over and over again.
Let me give you just one example of his genius. He's facing a Persian force of 60,000 men. He only has 15,000. So what does he do? He splits his small army into 3 groups. He tells them to march through the pitch-black desert, taking different routes, and to all arrive at the exact same spot at the exact same time for a surprise attack. Remember, there's no GPS, no radios, nothing. It's just brilliant navigation and timing. and it worked perfectly. Then he did it again, and then a third time. He destroyed all 3 parts of that massive army, one by one. I mean, that's a logistical nightmare for a modern army with all our tech, let alone back then. Just incredible. So you see what's happening here, right? You've got this perfect storm brewing. The old empires are weak and sick. A new, unified power has emerged. And it's led by a military prodigy. All these ingredients were about to come together in a handful of battles that wouldn't just decide a war. They were going to literally redraw the map of the world. Okay, so this all comes to a head at the Battle of Yarmouk. And just look at the numbers here. The new Arab army is facing a massive, professional Roman army that outnumbers them 3-1. 120,000 Romans against 40,000 Arabs. This should have been a slaughter. An easy Roman win, no question. But again, they had Khalid, and he was a master of not just tactics, but psychology. He picked his ground perfectly, using a giant ravine to protect one side of his army. And for 4 straight days, he just let the huge Roman force throw themselves at his lines again and again, just tiring them out. By day 5, the Romans are getting nervous. They offer to negotiate. But Khalid senses it. He knows their confidence is shot, so he says no. Then, during the night, he sends a small force to secretly capture the only bridge the Romans could use to escape. And on day 6, bam, he launches this massive, all-out cavalry attack, swings around their side, and pins the entire Roman army against the ravine with nowhere to run. It was a complete and total annihilation. The defeat was so total, so devastating, that the Roman Emperor Heraclius himself is said to have just given up. He abandoned the entire province of Syria. Think about that. Syria had been a core, wealthy part of the Roman Empire for over 6 centuries, and after one battle, he just walks away. It's in that moment that the balance of power in the world, it just shifted forever. But winning the battles is one thing. What happened after the battles was, in its own way, just as revolutionary. The way they approached conquest and ruling was completely different from the old empires. And the best example of this is what happened at Jerusalem. So, after a siege, the city is ready to surrender. The leader of Jerusalem, the archbishop, says, okay, we'll surrender. But only to your leader, the Caliph Omar, in person. So Omar travels to the city. And what happens when he gets there? Well, it shows a completely different way of doing things. I mean, look at the difference here. The standard practice for Roman or Persian conquest was, well, it was brutal. You enslave people, you plunder the city for all it's worth, you seize property. That was just how it was done. But Caliph Omar shows up and offers the complete opposite. He promises no slavery, no looting, no one's property will be touched, and the city itself will be left unharmed. For the archbishop, this was just unheard of. He was so shocked by how generous the terms were, he surrendered right then and there. And these weren't just empty promises. Omar's actions spoke volumes. He gets invited to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the most sacred site in Christianity. And he says no. Why? Because he knew that if he, the caliph, prayed there, his followers would later turn it into a mosque, and he wanted it to remain a Christian church. Then, he goes to the Temple Mount, a site holy to Jews, which the Romans had spent 500 years using as a garbage dump just to disrespect them. Omar starts clearing away the trash with his own hands. And to top it off, he invites 80 Jewish families who had been kicked out by the Romans to come back and live in the city. This was a completely new model for how different religions could coexist under one rule. So, when you put it all together, you see this wasn't just a story of military conquest. It really was that perfect storm. You had centuries of decay and disease creating this huge power vacuum. And right at that moment, a unified, energetic, and brilliantly led force emerged to fill it. It really drives home the point that the pre-existing weakness of the old empires was just as critical, if not more so, than the strength of the force that replaced them. And that leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. When we see these huge, world-changing moments in history, how much of it is about the strength of the winner, and how much is it really about the weakness of the loser? Is history pushed forward by rising stars, or is it pulled forward by old worlds that are already falling apart on their own?